Standing. In my 30 years of evaluating young pianists, I have never heard such an absurd request. The famous pianist's voice cut through the prestigious academy like a blade, his cold eyes fixed on the young black boy who dared to be different. What happened when a world-renowned classical pianist publicly humiliated a gifted black student with a painful secret? Why did the entire auditorium fall silent after the boy placed his hands on the keys? How could a single performance change the trajectory of not just one life, but an entire institution? The story of Marcus Johnson will move you to tears and remind you that sometimes, our greatest limitations become our most powerful strengths. Dear viewer, if you are watching my story for the first time, I humbly request you write the location from where you are watching right now, subscribe this channel and press the bell icon now not to miss the notifications of my daily published new stories. Thank you, and let's dive into the full story. Marcus Johnson's fingers danced across the worn-out keyboard, coaxing beautiful melodies from the second-hand piano his father had sacrificed so much to purchase. The 14-year-old closed his eyes, allowing Chopin's nocturne to flow through him like a gentle river. Music was his escape, his sanctuary from the pain that had become his constant companion. "That's beautiful, son," Elijah Johnson said, standing in the doorway of their modest apartment. His work uniform was wrinkled after a 12-hour shift at the factory, but pride shone in his tired eyes. Marcus smiled but winced as he shifted on the piano bench. The movement sent a sharp jolt of pain through his lower back, a daily reminder of that horrible day 6 months ago. "Back bothering you again?" Elijah asked, concern replacing pride. Marcus nodded, the memory washing over him like a cold wave. Ms. Reynolds' classroom. Her voice sharp as a knife when she'd caught him tapping rhythms on his desk instead of focusing on her history lesson. "Since you're so interested in making noise instead of learning, Mr. Johnson, perhaps you'd like to stand for the remainder of class," she'd sneered, yanking him from his seat. When Marcus had tried to sit back down during the break, she'd shoved his chair away, causing him to fall hard onto the corner of a desk. The pain had been immediate and blinding. Despite his father's attempts to hold the school accountable, Ms. Reynolds had denied everything. No witnesses had come forward. "I'm fine, Dad," Marcus lied, straightening his posture despite the agony. "Mrs. Coleman says I need to practice this piece perfectly for next week." Elijah sighed. "The doctor said you shouldn't sit for too long. Your back needs time to heal." "Music doesn't wait, Dad. You always say that, remember." Marcus turned back to the piano, his fingers returning to the keys. The injury had changed everything. Standing was bearable, but sitting for more than 15 minutes sent spasms of pain shooting through his body. Yet giving up piano was unthinkable. It was more than just music to Marcus, it was his future, his dream. As the melody filled their small living room, Marcus played through the pain, his mind transforming the discomfort into emotional depth in the music. In those moments, with notes flowing through his fingertips, he wasn't a black boy from the wrong side of town with a damaged back. He was simply a musician, speaking the universal language that needed no translation. What he didn't know was that in just a few days, his ability to transform pain into beauty would be put to the ultimate test on a stage far bigger than he had ever imagined. "Marcus, wait." Mrs. Coleman called, hurrying down the school hallway with surprising speed for a woman in her 60s. Her gray hair bounced with each step, and her face glowed with excitement. Marcus turned, one hand instinctively reaching for his back as he shifted his weight. "Yes, Mrs. Coleman." She thrust a glossy brochure into his hands, her eyes sparkling. "It's happening. Victor Reinhardt is giving a masterclass at Westridge Academy next week, and I've secured you a spot." Marcus stared at the brochure, his heart racing. Victor Reinhardt was a legendary pianist, his recordings the gold standard for classical interpretation. But, how? These masterclasses are invitation only. For rich kids with connections. Mrs. Coleman smiled mysteriously. "Let's just say I called in a favor. The director of Westridge was my student 30 years ago. He owed me." She squeezed Marcus's shoulder. "This is your chance, Marcus. Reinhardt has connections to Juilliard, Curtis, every major conservatory. If he notices you, The possibility hung in the air, almost too wonderful to contemplate. But reality quickly dampened Marcus's excitement. "I can't afford the fee," he said quietly, trying to hand the brochure back. "And my back, sitting at a piano for hours." "The fee is waived," Mrs. Coleman said firmly. "And as for your back, we'll figure something out. This opportunity is too important." That evening, Marcus showed the brochure to his father. Elijah studied it carefully, his expression unreadable. "Westridge Academy," he finally said. "That's on the other side of town. Those kids come from money." "Dad, Mrs. Coleman says this could change everything. Victor Reinhardt could help me get a scholarship. Maybe even to Juilliard someday." Elijah set the brochure down and rubbed his weathered hands together. "Then you have to go." He stood up suddenly. "I need to make a call." The next few days passed in a blur. Elijah picked up extra shifts, returning home with red-rimmed eyes and slouched shoulders. When Marcus protested, his father simply shook his head. "My job is to give you wings, son. The flying part is up to you." 3 days before the masterclass, Elijah presented Marcus with a gift, a brand new suit, charcoal gray with a crisp white shirt. "Dad, how did you—" "Don't worry about that," Elijah interrupted, helping Marcus try on the jacket. "You need to look the part." As Marcus stood before the mirror, the suit transforming him into someone who looked like he belonged at Westridge Academy, his father stood behind him, hands resting gently on his shoulders. "Remember what I always tell you, Marcus. Your music comes from here," he tapped Marcus's chest, "not from what people see when they look at you. But sometimes, you need to get them to listen first." Marcus nodded, fighting back tears. His back throbbed with a dull ache, a constant reminder of the obstacles he faced. But as he carefully removed the suit, he made a silent promise, to his father, to Mrs. Coleman, and to himself. He would make them proud, no matter what it took. What he couldn't possibly know was that the opportunity of a lifetime would also become the greatest challenge he had ever faced. Westridge Academy loomed like a castle against the morning sky, its stone facade and manicured grounds a stark contrast to the public school Marcus attended. As Elijah's old sedan pulled up to the main entrance, Marcus felt his stomach knot with anxiety. "You've got this," Elijah said, straightening Marcus's tie one last time. "Just be yourself." "That's what I'm afraid of," Marcus muttered, eyeing a group of students ascending the grand staircase. They carried expensive instrument cases and wore clothing that probably cost more than his father made in a month. "Call me when you're done," Elijah said, giving Marcus's shoulder a gentle squeeze. "I'll be at work, but I'll come straight here." Marcus nodded, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the car. His new dress shoes clicked against the pavement as he made his way toward the entrance, the sound emphasizing how out of place he felt. The weight of the music folder in his hands offered some comfort. In those pages, at least, he knew his worth. "Excuse me," a voice called as Marcus reached the top of the stairs. A girl with perfectly styled blonde hair looked him up and down, her expression puzzled. "Deliveries are supposed to go to the back entrance." Heat rushed to Marcus's face. "I'm not making a delivery. I'm here for the masterclass." The girl's eyebrows shot up, and she exchanged glances with 2 boys standing nearby. "Oh. Sorry," she said, not sounding sorry at all. One of the boys snickered. "Are you sure you're in the right place? This is Victor Reinhardt's masterclass, not a community program." "I know exactly where I am," Marcus replied, struggling to keep his voice steady. "Mrs. Coleman submitted my application." "Coleman?" the second boy repeated. "From that public school in the East District. How did you even—" "That's enough, Mr. Whitman," a stern voice interrupted. An older man in an impeccable suit approached, his silver hair cut with military precision. "All participants should proceed to the auditorium for check-in." The students scattered, but not before casting dubious glances at Marcus. The man studied Marcus with cold gray eyes. "You must be Johnson. The scholarship case." Marcus straightened his shoulders despite the pain it caused. "Yes, sir. Marcus Johnson. I'm Director Phillips. Mrs. Coleman speaks highly of you. His tone suggested skepticism. Westridge Academy maintains certain standards. I trust you'll represent your background appropriately. Before Marcus could respond, Director Phillips turned on his heel. The auditorium is through those doors. Don't be late. The auditorium took Marcus's breath away, a cathedral to music with soaring ceilings, plush velvet seats, and a stage dominated by a magnificent Steinway grand piano that gleamed under the spotlights. About 20 students had already gathered, their chatter creating a buzz of excitement and nervous energy. As Marcus made his way down the aisle, conversations faltered. Eyes turned to him, some curious, others dismissive. He recognized the girl and boys from outside, now huddled with others, whispering and glancing his way. Did you see his shoes? How did he even get in? Probably some diversity initiative. The words drifted to him in fragments, each one a small cut. Marcus found a seat at the edge of the group, trying to make himself invisible while simultaneously fighting the pain that sitting caused. He shifted uncomfortably, already worried about how he would manage during the masterclass. A woman in a sleek black dress approached the stage, tapping a microphone. Welcome, students, to Victor Reinhardt's exclusive masterclass. You represent the finest young talent in classical piano, chosen from hundreds of applicants. Mr. Reinhardt will arrive shortly to work with each of you individually. The woman began explaining the format. Each student would perform a prepared piece, after which Victor would offer critique and instruction. As Marcus listened, he felt the enormity of the opportunity, and the challenge, ahead of him. Remember, the woman concluded, Mr. Reinhardt values proper form and etiquette as much as technical skill. This is not merely about playing notes, but about demonstrating your understanding of what it means to be a classical pianist. Marcus swallowed hard, his back throbbing as if on cue. Standing to play would be unorthodox, breaking the very etiquette being emphasized. But sitting for an extended performance would be impossible with his injury. As the woman began calling names for the performance order, Marcus closed his eyes and focused on his breathing, trying to center himself. When his name was called, Marcus Johnson, you'll be performer number 12, whispers rippled through the group again. 12, someone muttered. That's right before lunch. Reinhardt is always at his worst right before breaks. Marcus opened his eyes to see the blonde girl from earlier staring at him, a satisfied smile on her lips. Good luck, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. You're going to need it. In that moment, Marcus realized that playing for Victor Reinhardt might be the least of his challenges. First, he would have to survive a room full of people who had already decided he didn't belong. A hush fell over the auditorium as the massive double doors swung open. Victor Reinhardt strode in, his presence commanding every inch of the space. Tall and imposing with salt and pepper hair swept dramatically back from a high forehead, he wore an impeccably tailored black suit that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His thin lips were set in a perpetual slight downturn, as if he were constantly disappointed by what the world offered him. That's him, whispered a boy sitting nearby, his voice a mixture of awe and terror. They say he made a prodigy from Vienna cry last year. I heard he walked out on a performance at Carnegie Hall because the piano was tuned a quarter tone flat, another student added. He can hear things no one else can. Marcus watched Reinhardt's approach with a dry mouth. The man's reputation preceded him, a virtuoso who had performed with every major orchestra in the world, whose recordings won awards year after year, and whose temperament was as legendary as his talent. Stories of his cutting critiques and impossible standards circulated among piano students like ghost stories around a campfire. Director Phillips rushed forward to greet him, hand extended. Mr. Reinhardt, what an honor to welcome you back to Westridge Academy. Reinhardt barely acknowledged the gesture with a curt nod before turning his attention to the students. His eyes, sharp and evaluating, swept across the group. For a brief moment, his gaze landed on Marcus, a flicker of something, surprise, disapproval, crossing his features before moving on. I have limited time, Reinhardt announced, his accent clipping his words precisely. We will proceed immediately. I expect preparation, poise, and perfection. Anything less is a waste of my time and yours." He turned to Director Phillips. "The first student." A petite girl with dark hair approached the piano, her hands visibly trembling. She performed Bach's prelude in C-sharp minor with technical proficiency that Marcus admired, but when she finished, Reinhardt sighed deeply. "You played notes, Miss Chen. Bach wrote music. Perhaps you could consider the difference before our next meeting." The girl's face crumpled as she returned to her seat. Student after student faced similar dismissals. Chopin would be turning in his grave at that tempo. "Did you intend to murder Beethoven a second time, or was that accidental?" If that interpretation were any more pedestrian, it would need a crosswalk. By the fifth performance, sweat beaded on Marcus's forehead. His back pain intensified with each passing minute on the hard auditorium seat. He shifted constantly, trying to find relief without drawing attention. "Is there a problem, Mr.?" Reinhardt suddenly asked, fixing Marcus with a penetrating stare. "Johnson, sir." "Marcus Johnson," he replied, feeling every eye in the room turn to him. "Mr. Johnson, your fidgeting is distracting both me and your colleagues. Perhaps you could demonstrate the basic courtesy of sitting still." Heat rushed to Marcus's face. "I'm sorry, sir. I have a back injury that makes sitting difficult." A few snickers rippled through the audience. Reinhardt's eyebrow arched slightly. "Indeed. How unfortunate. Nevertheless, composure is essential for a pianist. Pain is merely one more element to control." Director Phillips cleared his throat. "Mr. Reinhardt, perhaps we should continue with the performances?" Reinhardt nodded curtly and returned his attention to the stage, but the damage was done. More whispers, more glances. Marcus stared at his shoes, wishing he could disappear. As performer number 11 concluded, a boy playing Liszt with impressive technical skill but receiving a withering critique about his complete lack of emotional intelligence, Marcus's number approached. The pain in his back had escalated from persistent ache to sharp stabs. Sitting through his own performance would be impossible, but standing would draw even more unwanted attention. "Marcus Johnson," Director Phillips called. "You're next." Marcus rose slowly, gathering his music. Each step toward the gleaming piano felt like crossing an ocean. The magnificent Steinway waited on stage like a beautiful, dangerous creature, offering opportunity and judgment in equal measure. As he placed his music on the stand, he made his decision. It would have to be honesty, whatever the consequences. "Mr. Reinhardt," he said, his voice steadier than he felt, "due to my back injury, I need to request permission to perform standing rather than sitting." The auditorium fell completely silent. Reinhardt's eyes narrowed, and Director Phillips looked as if he might faint. The famous pianist was about to respond when the doors opened once more. Mrs. Coleman slipped in quietly, giving Marcus an encouraging smile. Her presence gave him strength, a reminder that someone in this intimidating place believed in him. Little did he know that his request would trigger the most humiliating, and ultimately transformative, experience of his young life. "Standing?" Victor Reinhardt's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "In my 30 years of evaluating young pianists, I have never heard such an absurd request." His cold eyes fixed on Marcus with laser intensity. "The piano bench, Mr. Johnson, is not an optional accessory." Marcus swallowed hard, painfully aware of every face turned toward him. "Sir, I have a medical condition." "We all have conditions, Mr. Johnson," Reinhardt interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "Arthritis, tendinitis, performance anxiety. Professional musicians learn to adapt without compromising form." Director Phillips stepped forward, his expression a mixture of embarrassment and irritation. "Perhaps Mr. Johnson could defer his performance until he's better prepared to meet the standards of this masterclass." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience. Marcus saw the blonde girl from earlier whispering to her friends, smirking. The message was clear: he didn't belong here. "No," Marcus said, surprising himself with his firmness. "I've prepared for this opportunity. I just need an accommodation." Reinhardt studied him for a long moment, then gestured toward the piano. Very well. Show us this unconventional approach. I'm curious to see how you manage dynamic control without proper leverage. Marcus approached the piano, his heart pounding. He gently pushed the bench aside, earning more whispers from the audience. The familiar ripple of pain shot through his lower back as he positioned himself, but he took a deep breath and placed his hands above the keys. One moment, Reinhardt called. What will you be playing for us today? Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, Marcus replied. A raised eyebrow. Ambitious. Perhaps excessively so. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, centering himself. In his mind, he heard his father's voice, your music comes from here, not from what people see when they look at you. He began to play, his fingers finding the opening G minor chord. The initial melody flowed softly, tentatively, just as Chopin had intended. Marcus felt his body swaying slightly as he played, adjusting his position to manage both his pain and the technical demands of the piece. For a few measures, he lost himself in the music, forgetting the hostile audience and intimidating setting. But then he heard it, a derisive snort from Reinhardt, followed by a sharp command. Stop, stop. The pianist rose from his seat. This is precisely why traditional form exists. Your posture is compromising the voicing. The melodic line is lost in your swaying. Marcus froze, his hands hovering above the keys. The room seemed to spin around him, faces blurring except for Reinhardt's, which remained in sharp, disapproving focus. Perhaps, Reinhardt continued, his voice dripping with sarcasm, you might also request to play with your feet, if your hands are similarly indisposed. Laughter erupted from several students. Marcus felt heat rushing to his face, shame and anger warring within him. From the back of the room, he caught Mrs. Coleman's eye, her expression a mixture of outrage and encouragement. I can play, Marcus said quietly. If you'll just let me continue. The masterclass has a format, Mr. Johnson. We don't change centuries of tradition to accommodate. Reinhardt gestured vaguely at Marcus's standing position, whatever this is. Either play properly or yield your spot to someone who will. Marcus stood frozen at the piano, trapped between his physical limitations and the unyielding expectations before him. The choice loomed impossible, sit and endure potentially debilitating pain, or walk away from the opportunity of a lifetime. In that moment, as whispers continued to circulate and judgment hung heavy in the air, Marcus made his decision. It would define not just this performance, but everything that followed. Perhaps, Victor Reinhardt said, stepping onto the stage with deliberate slowness, you would care to explain to everyone precisely why you feel entitled to special treatment. His voice carried throughout the auditorium, ensuring every person heard the challenge. Marcus gripped the edge of the piano, steadying himself. Sir, I injured my back badly 6 months ago. Sitting for extended periods causes severe pain. And how did this injury occur? Sports accident. Heroic rescue, perhaps. Sarcasm dripped from every syllable. Marcus hesitated. The truth felt too personal, too vulnerable to share in this hostile environment. It was an accident at school. Convenient, Reinhardt remarked, circling Marcus like a predator. And you expect the entire classical tradition to bend to accommodate this accident? Director Phillips cleared his throat nervously. Mr. Reinhardt, perhaps we should move on to the next student. No, Reinhardt cut him off sharply. This is educational for everyone. He turned back to Marcus. Classical performance is not merely about playing notes. It is about discipline, tradition, and respect for the art form. Do you imagine that Horowitz or Rubinstein would stand to perform because they felt uncomfortable? I don't think, Marcus began. Precisely, Reinhardt interrupted. You don't think. You assume that your discomfort outweighs centuries of established practice. The blonde girl in the front row smirked, leaning over to whisper something to her neighbor. Several students were recording the exchange on their phones, barely concealing their enjoyment of his humiliation. I practiced this piece for months, Marcus said, his voice stronger now despite the trembling in his legs. I'm not asking to change how I interpret Chopin, just how I physically. Interpretation begins with form. Reinhardt's voice boomed. Your posture affects weight distribution, which affects touch, which affects tone. Standing creates an entirely different relationship with the instrument. He turned to address the audience, as if Marcus were merely a visual aid in a lecture. This, students, is the perfect illustration of modern entitlement. The belief that rules need not apply if they cause personal inconvenience. Marcus felt something break inside him, not physically, but emotionally. The unfairness crashed over him like a wave. He hadn't asked for the injury. Hadn't asked for Ms. Reynolds to shove him into that desk. Hadn't asked for the chronic pain that followed him daily. Sir, Marcus said, his voice quiet but clear, with respect, I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for equal opportunity to play. Reinhardt's eyebrows shot up. Equal opportunity? You were given exactly that, the same chance as everyone else to sit at this piano and perform. You choose not to take it. Because I physically can't without. Life is full of challenges, Mr. Johnson, Reinhardt cut him off again. A true artist overcomes them rather than demanding the world change to suit their limitations. From the back of the room, Mrs. Coleman stood up. This is outrageous. The boy has a documented medical condition. Director Phillips hurried toward her. Mrs. Coleman, please. This is Mr. Reinhardt's masterclass. It's a masterclass in cruelty is what it is, she retorted, but lowered herself back into her seat, her eyes never leaving Marcus. Reinhardt turned back to Marcus, his expression a mixture of disdain and dismissal. I have 18 other students who have prepared properly and are waiting for their turn. I suggest you either sit and play like everyone else or step aside. The choice is yours. The silence that followed was deafening. 20 pairs of eyes bored into Marcus, waiting for his surrender or defiance. The pain in his back throbbed in time with his racing heart, a physical reminder of everything at stake. You haven't heard me play, Marcus finally said, his voice somehow steady despite the storm inside him. You're judging me based on how I stand, not how I make music. A few students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the first hint that perhaps not everyone enjoyed witnessing his public humiliation. Very well, Reinhardt said, his tone suggesting he was granting an enormous favor. You have 2 minutes to demonstrate why I should waste any more of our time. Show us if there's any substance behind this unorthodox presentation. He stepped off the stage and returned to his seat, making a show of checking his watch. 2 minutes, Mr. Johnson. Beginning now. Marcus turned back to the piano, his mind racing. 2 minutes wasn't enough for Chopin's Ballade, the piece ran nearly 10 minutes in full. He would need to choose sections wisely, to show both technical prowess and emotional depth. As his fingers hovered over the keys, he caught sight of Mrs. Coleman nodding encouragingly. Beside her sat Director Phillips, arms crossed tightly across his chest. Marcus took a deep breath and began to play, jumping directly to the most technically challenging section of the ballade. His fingers flew across the keys, the cascade of notes building in intensity. Standing allowed him to use his body's natural weight and momentum in ways he hadn't fully explored before. Yet even as he played, he could see Reinhardt's dismissive expression, the maestro already having decided the performance was a failure before hearing a single note. What Marcus didn't know was that his next decision would change everything, not just for himself, but for everyone in that auditorium. The final notes of Marcus's abbreviated performance hung in the air, fading into a silence that felt both heavy and electric. He stood still, hands hovering above the keys, waiting for Reinhardt's verdict. The famous pianist's face remained impassive. Technically proficient, he finally said, his tone suggesting this was the faintest of praise. But utterly lacking in emotional maturity. You play Chopin like someone reading a grocery list. A few students snickered. Marcus felt something deep inside him beginning to crack, all the pressure, pain, and prejudice of the past months crystallizing into a single, unbearable moment. You're not even giving me a chance, he said, his voice barely audible. What was that? Reinhardt leaned forward. Speak up if you have something to say. You decided I would fail before I played a single note, Marcus said, louder now. Because I don't look like them. He gestured toward the audience of privileged students. Because I don't come from money. Because I stand instead of sit. Gasps rippled through the auditorium. No one challenged Victor Reinhardt, certainly not a scholarship student from the wrong side of town. How dare you, Reinhardt said, his voice dangerously soft. Your failure has nothing to do with your background and everything to do with your attitude. Your unwillingness to respect tradition. Marcus felt tears threatening but fought them back. Respect? What about respect for different abilities? Different approaches? This is absurd, Director Phillips interjected, hurrying toward the stage. Mr. Johnson, you are out of line. I suggest you apologize to Mr. Reinhardt immediately and, no. Mrs. Coleman's voice rang out as she strode down the aisle. I've heard enough. She reached the stage and positioned herself beside Marcus, one hand on his shoulder. This young man has more raw talent than most pianists develop in a lifetime. And he plays through chronic pain because music means everything to him. Reinhardt's face flushed with anger. Who exactly are you to interrupt my masterclass? Eleanor Coleman. I've taught piano for 40 years, and I know genuine talent when I hear it. Her voice softened as she turned to Marcus. And genuine character when I see it. Marcus looked at his teacher, drawing strength from her unwavering belief in him. The room seemed to recede, the whispers and stares fading as he faced a crossroads. He could walk away now, preserve what little dignity remained, and never return to this world that seemed determined to reject him. Or he could stay and fight. Marcus, Mrs. Coleman said quietly, you don't have to do this. We can leave. He glanced toward the exit, imagining the relief of escaping this humiliation. His father would understand. Mrs. Coleman would find him other opportunities. Then his eyes fell on the piano, the magnificent Steinway that, despite everything, still called to him. Walking away meant letting Reinhardt win. It meant accepting that people like him didn't belong in places like this. I want to play, he said finally. The full piece. This masterclass has a schedule, Director Phillips objected. We can't possibly. Let him play, a voice called from the audience. Marcus looked up in surprise to see one of the students, a boy who had performed earlier, standing. I want to hear the whole piece. So do I, another student chimed in. Reinhardt looked thunderous. This is not a democracy. I decide who plays and for how long. Then decide, Mrs. Coleman challenged. Are you so afraid of being proven wrong that you won't allow a 14-year-old boy to play Chopin? The room fell silent, all eyes on Reinhardt. His reputation hung in the balance, deny Marcus a fair hearing and appear petty, or grant it and risk being shown up by a child. Fine, he finally said, his tone icy. Play your Chopin, Mr. Johnson. Standing, sitting, hanging from the chandelier, I care not. But know that I will judge the performance with the same rigorous standards I apply to everyone. That's all I'm asking for, Marcus replied. As Mrs. Coleman squeezed his shoulder and returned to her seat, Marcus closed his eyes, gathering himself for what would either be the greatest triumph or the most complete failure of his young life. What happened next would leave everyone in that room forever changed. Marcus stood alone at the piano, acutely aware of the weight of every gaze in the room. The polished surface of the Steinway reflected the stage lights, and for a brief moment, he caught a glimpse of himself, small, dark-skinned, out of place in this temple of privilege and tradition. Director Phillips cleared his throat impatiently. We're waiting, Mr. Johnson. The words, I can't do this, formed in Marcus's mind, nearly making it to his lips. But then, unbidden, a memory surfaced, his father standing in their kitchen the night before, ironing Marcus's new shirt with meticulous care. Dad, what if they don't want me there? Marcus had asked. Elijah's hands had stilled on the iron. They might not, he'd admitted. People have a way of seeing what they expect to see. But that's their problem, not yours. Then why go at all? Because sometimes, son, you have to claim your space in this world. Nobody's going to hand it to you. Elijah had carefully hung up the shirt. Your mother used to say something I never forgot, they don't have to love you. They just have to hear you. The memory strengthened Marcus. His mother had died when he was 8, but her words lived on through his father. She'd been a singer in the church choir, her voice so powerful it could make people weep during hymns. I'll be playing Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, Marcus announced, his voice steady. I'll be standing due to a back injury. Before Reinhardt could interject, Marcus continued, the injury happened when my former teacher, Ms. Reynolds, pushed me for tapping rhythms on my desk. I fell against a desk corner. The damage was severe enough that sitting for extended periods causes extreme pain. A hush fell over the audience. By sharing the truth, Marcus had transformed from an entitled troublemaker to a victim of injustice. He hadn't planned to reveal this, had guarded the humiliating story closely, but somehow, speaking it aloud removed its power over him. That's unfortunate, Reinhardt said, clearly thrown off balance. However, the circumstances of your injury don't change the standards of classical performance. I understand, Marcus replied. Judge my music, not my posture. He positioned himself at the piano, adjusting his stance to minimize the pain while maximizing his control of the instrument. In this moment, he was grateful for the hours he'd spent practicing standing up, developing techniques to compensate for the different angle and leverage. Just before he began, Marcus glanced toward Mrs. Coleman. She gave him a slight nod, not of encouragement, but of acknowledgement. He didn't need encouragement anymore. He needed to be seen. To be heard. Marcus placed his hands on the keys and began the opening bars of Chopin's Ballade. The plaintive G minor theme emerged, questioning and tentative. Unlike his earlier truncated attempt, this time he allowed the music to breathe, to tell its story without rushing. The ballade was a narrative in music, beginning in uncertainty, building to passionate intensity, and ending in tragic grandeur. It matched his own journey perfectly, though he hadn't realized it until this moment. As the introduction gave way to the main theme, Marcus felt something shift inside him. The pain in his back receded to the periphery of his awareness. The judgmental stares faded. Even Reinhardt's imposing presence seemed to diminish. There was only the music now, Chopin's genius flowing through his fingers, his body, his soul. The standing position, far from being a handicap, gave him a newfound freedom. He could lean into the powerful chords, pull back for the delicate passages. His body became part of the instrument, swaying slightly with the rhythm, adding physical dimension to the emotional landscape of the piece. When he reached the development section, the technical challenges mounted, rapid scales, complex harmonies, dramatic dynamic shifts. Marcus had struggled with these passages for months, sometimes practicing a single measure 50 times until his fingers could navigate it blindly. Now, those hours of preparation served him well. His hands flew across the keyboard with precision and confidence, each note finding its place in Chopin's intricate tapestry. He was vaguely aware of shifting movements in the audience, people leaning forward, phones being lowered, Reinhardt's permanent frown deepening into something unreadable. But these observations registered only fleetingly. Marcus was lost in the music now, transported to a place where pain and prejudice couldn't follow. The ballade carried him forward, each phrase building on the last, tension mounting as the piece approached its powerful climax. What Marcus couldn't see was the transformation happening on the faces around him, skepticism giving way to surprise, then reluctant admiration, and finally, for some, awe. He was no longer the out-of-place black boy with the strange request. He was becoming something else entirely in their eyes, a musician whose talent could not be denied, whose passion could not be dismissed. As Marcus approached the final section of the ballade, he poured everything into the music, his frustration at Ms. Reynolds, his gratitude to his father, his determination to prove Reinhardt wrong. The coda exploded from the piano, the cascading octaves and thundering bass notes filling the auditorium with sound. And then, as suddenly as the storm had begun, it ended, the final G minor chord resonating in the perfect acoustics of the hall before fading into complete silence. Marcus stood motionless, hands still hovering above the keys, breathing heavily from the physical and emotional exertion. For one terrifying moment, the silence continued, and he wondered if he had failed after all. Then came the sound that would change everything. The first note of Chopin's Ballade hung in the air like a question. Marcus's fingers trembled slightly as they pressed into the keys, but the sound that emerged was clear and true. The gentle, almost hesitant opening slowly unfurled, a storyteller clearing his throat before sharing a tale of great significance. From the corner of his eye, Marcus could see Victor Reinhardt's posture stiffen, the famous pianist leaning forward almost imperceptibly. The renowned musician had expected mediocrity, a technically adequate but emotionally vacant performance from a boy he'd already dismissed. What he heard instead was something altogether different. As Marcus progressed into the main theme, his body naturally adjusted to accommodate his standing position. Rather than hindering him, it seemed to free him. Without the constraint of the bench, he could shift his weight subtly with the music's flow, lending physical emphasis to Chopin's emotional contours. The first minute passed, then two. The auditorium remained silent except for the sound of the piano. No whispers, no shifting in seats, no phones recording. Just music filling the space, demanding attention. When Marcus reached the first technical challenge, a series of rapid runs that cascaded down the keyboard, his hands moved with precision born of countless hours of practice. Each note was distinct yet part of a seamless whole, like raindrops forming a waterfall. Director Phillips's stern expression gradually softened into puzzlement. Mrs. Coleman smiled knowingly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. But it was Reinhardt's face that underwent the most remarkable transformation, from contemptuous certainty to confusion to the dawning recognition that he might have misjudged entirely. As the piece progressed to its more turbulent middle section, Marcus allowed himself to become fully immersed in the music. The pain in his back, constant companion for months, seemed to recede, not gone but transmuted into something else, an intensity that informed his interpretation rather than impeding it. His fingers struck a particularly powerful chord sequence, and he swayed slightly, using his full body to control the volume and attack. Standing allowed him to harness gravity in ways sitting pianists couldn't, leaning into fortissimo passages, pulling back for pianissimo moments. 5 minutes in, and the auditorium remained spellbound. The wealthy students who had mocked him earlier now watched with expressions ranging from surprise to grudging respect. The blonde girl who'd mistaken him for a delivery person sat with her mouth slightly open, phone forgotten in her lap. When Marcus reached a moment of relative calm in the piece, a brief oasis of lyrical beauty before the coming storm of the finale, he caught Reinhardt's eye. The pianist's expression had transformed entirely, his professional mask slipping to reveal something rarely seen, genuine wonder. This fleeting connection nearly broke Marcus's concentration, but he pulled his focus back to the music. The piece was building toward its climax now, demanding everything he had, technically, physically, emotionally. His fingers flew across the keys in the notorious coda section, where Chopin had piled challenge upon challenge. Octave runs, complex harmonies, dramatic dynamic shifts, all executed with a control that belied Marcus's youth and circumstances. As he approached the final moments of the piece, time seemed to slow. Each note existed in its own perfect moment before yielding to the next. The final descending passage, a pianistic representation of collapse and tragedy, rang out with crystalline clarity before resolving into the concluding chords. The last note faded, its resonance lingering in the perfect acoustics of the auditorium. Marcus remained motionless, eyes closed, hands suspended above the keys as if reluctant to break the spell. For 3 heartbeats, the silence was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. Then, from the back of the room, a single person began to applaud, Mrs. Coleman, her face streaked with tears, standing in tribute to her student's triumph. Another person joined, then another. Soon, the entire auditorium erupted in applause, not the polite acknowledgement given to the previous performers, but genuine, enthusiastic appreciation. All except Victor Reinhardt, who remained seated, his expression inscrutable as he studied the boy who had just shattered every assumption he'd made. Marcus opened his eyes, momentarily disoriented by the response. He hadn't played for applause or vindication. He'd played because music was his truth, his voice in a world that often refused to hear him. As the applause continued, Director Phillips appeared at Reinhardt's side, bending to whisper something in the pianist's ear. Reinhardt nodded slightly, then rose to his feet, approaching the stage with measured steps. Marcus tensed, unsure what to expect. Would the famous pianist acknowledge what had just happened, or find new grounds for criticism? What came next would determine not just the outcome of this masterclass, but the trajectory of Marcus's future. The applause gradually subsided as Victor Reinhardt ascended the steps to the stage. His face remained unreadable, years of maintaining a professional facade serving him well in this moment of uncertainty. He stood before Marcus, studying him as if seeing him for the first time. "Young man," Reinhardt finally said, his voice carrying through the silent auditorium, "where did you learn to play like that?" The question caught Marcus off guard. He had prepared for criticism, even for grudging acknowledgement, but not for genuine curiosity. "My mother started teaching me when I was 4, Marcus replied. "After she passed, my father worked extra shifts to pay for lessons with Mrs. Coleman." Reinhardt nodded slowly. "And this, unconventional stance. You developed this technique entirely on your own?" "I had to," Marcus said simply. "After the injury, sitting became impossible for more than a few minutes. My father built a platform at home so I could practice standing at the correct height." Something flickered across Reinhardt's face, recognition, perhaps, or memory. "Your interpretation of the second theme, it reminded me of," he stopped abruptly, then continued more carefully. "It had elements I haven't heard since Rubinstein." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Comparing anyone to Arthur Rubinstein, especially a 14-year-old from a public school, was unprecedented from a critic as exacting as Reinhardt. "I study his recordings," Marcus admitted. "My father found his complete Chopin collection at a garage sale." The corner of Reinhardt's mouth twitched, almost forming a smile. Garage sales and platforms built by hand. Not the typical path to mastering Chopin. "No, sir. And yet, here we are." Reinhardt turned to address the audience. "What we have witnessed today is why I insist on such high standards. Because occasionally, very occasionally, someone comes along who reminds us what those standards are truly for." He paused, then continued with uncharacteristic humility. "They are not, as I incorrectly suggested earlier, merely about tradition or form. They exist to serve the music itself, to elevate and illuminate the composer's intentions." The famous pianist turned back to Marcus. "You just played the ballade as Chopin intended it to be played, with technical precision in service to emotional truth. Whether standing or sitting is entirely irrelevant to that achievement." A stunned silence followed this admission. Victor Reinhardt, notorious for his unwavering insistence on traditional approaches, had just publicly reversed his position. "Mr. Johnson," he continued, "I owe you an apology. I allowed preconceptions to cloud my judgment, about your background, your appearance, and your physical limitation. In doing so, I nearly missed witnessing a remarkable talent." Marcus blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. After months of pain and doubt, after the humiliation of the past hour, this validation from one of the world's great pianists was almost too much to process. "Thank you, sir," he managed to say. Reinhardt studied him thoughtfully. "Your teacher mentioned your back injury resulted from an incident at school." Marcus nodded, uncomfortable with the personal turn of the conversation. "Would you mind elaborating?" Something in Reinhardt's tone suggested this wasn't mere curiosity. Marcus hesitated, then decided the truth had already served him well today. "My previous teacher, Ms. Reynolds, caught me tapping rhythms on my desk during history class. She made me stand for the remainder of the period as punishment. Later, when I tried to sit during break, she pulled my chair away. I fell onto the corner of a desk." Gasps rippled through the audience. Director Phillips looked horrified. "And what happened to this teacher?" Reinhardt asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Nothing. She denied it happened that way. No one saw it clearly enough to contradict her." "I see. Reinhardt's jaw tightened. And you've been in pain since? Yes, sir. The doctors say the damage to the muscles and nerves might heal eventually, but for now, sitting at the piano for more than a few minutes is. Marcus trailed off, not wanting to sound like he was complaining. Excruciating, Reinhardt finished for him. Yet you continued to play. To practice. To develop an entirely new approach to technique. Music is everything to me, Marcus said simply. Reinhardt nodded, as if Marcus had confirmed something important. He turned to Director Phillips. I would like to speak with Mr. Johnson and his teacher privately after the masterclass concludes. And I will require contact information for his father as well. Director Phillips, clearly sensing that something significant was happening, nodded quickly. Of course, Mr. Reinhardt. We can use my office. Reinhardt turned back to Marcus. One final question, if I may. What do you hope to achieve with your music? It was a standard question, one that typically invited rehearsed answers about conservatory dreams or concert careers. But Marcus answered from his heart. I want to show other kids like me that they belong wherever music takes them. That pain doesn't have to stop you. That being different can be a strength, not a weakness. The auditorium fell silent once more. Mrs. Coleman wiped tears from her eyes. Even the wealthy students who had mocked him earlier looked thoughtful, perhaps seeing their own privilege clearly for the first time. Well, Reinhardt said, his voice softer than anyone had heard it all day, I believe you've already begun to achieve that goal, Mr. Johnson. Today, you've taught everyone in this room something valuable, myself most of all. He extended his hand to Marcus, a gesture of professional respect rarely offered to someone so young. As Marcus shook it, Reinhardt leaned closer and spoke words meant only for him. Your mother would be very proud. What Marcus couldn't possibly know was that this moment would change not just his own future, but the culture of classical music education for years to come. The masterclass concluded with a subdued atmosphere, the remaining performances marked by a new humility from Reinhardt and a more thoughtful attention from the audience. When the final student finished, Director Phillips announced a brief reception in the adjoining hall, his eyes frequently darting to where Reinhardt stood in quiet conversation with Marcus and Mrs. Coleman. As students and parents filed out, many glanced back at the unlikely trio, the world-famous pianist, the public school teacher, and the boy who had changed the tenor of the day through sheer talent and determination. Marcus. A familiar voice called from the entrance. Elijah Johnson hurried down the aisle, still wearing his factory uniform, concern etched on his tired face. Mrs. Coleman texted me. Are you okay? Dad. Marcus's formal demeanor dissolved as his father approached. I'm fine. Better than fine. Elijah embraced his son, then stepped back, noticing Reinhardt for the first time. His expression shifted to cautious respect. Mr. Reinhardt, sir. Elijah Johnson. Mr. Johnson. Reinhardt extended his hand. Your son has demonstrated extraordinary talent today. And even more extraordinary character. Elijah's eyebrows rose slightly at the praise, clearly not what he had expected after Mrs. Coleman's urgent message. Perhaps we could continue this conversation in my office? Director Phillips suggested, gesturing toward the exit. Minutes later, they were seated in the oak-paneled room that served as the administrative heart of Westridge Academy. Classical music awards and photographs of famous alumni lined the walls, silent testimony to the institution's prestige. Mr. Johnson, Reinhardt began without preamble, I would like to offer Marcus private instruction, at no cost, as part of my Master Series program. Stunned silence followed this announcement. Mrs. Coleman gasped audibly. That's very generous, Elijah finally managed, his expression guarded. But we live across town, and my work schedule. Transportation can be arranged, Director Phillips interjected quickly, clearly sensing an opportunity to associate Westridge with whatever Reinhardt was planning. And lessons could be scheduled around your availability. Elijah looked at his son, whose eyes had widened with disbelief. Marcus? What do you think? It would be an honor, sir, Marcus said to Reinhardt, his voice steady despite his racing heart. But may I ask why? Reinhardt's expression softened slightly. Because talent like yours deserves nurturing, regardless of circumstance. And because your approach to playing, born of necessity rather than convention, has made me reconsider some long-held beliefs about technique and teaching. He paused, then continued with uncharacteristic openness. I was not unlike you once, Mr. Johnson. From circumstances that made a musical career seem impossible. Someone took a chance on me. I believe it's time I did the same for another. There was more to the story. Marcus could sense it in Reinhardt's carefully measured words, but now was not the moment to press. There's another matter, Reinhardt continued, turning to Director Phillips. I understand Westridge offers full scholarships to exceptional students. Director Phillips shifted uncomfortably. Yes, though our scholarship funds for this academic year have already been, I will personally fund a scholarship for Marcus, Reinhardt interrupted. Starting immediately. I assume that resolves any bureaucratic concerns. The director's demeanor transformed instantly. Of course. We would be honored to welcome Marcus to our student body. His talent clearly meets our exceptional standards. Mrs. Coleman couldn't contain her joy any longer. Marcus, do you understand what this means? You'll receive the finest music education available. Marcus nodded, still processing the dramatic reversal of his fortunes. Just hours ago, he had been an outsider facing ridicule. Now, doors were opening that he had only dreamed might be possible years in the future. There's one more thing, Reinhardt said. His tone shifted, becoming harder. This teacher who injured Marcus, Ms. Reynolds, was it? I want her name and school. Elijah straightened. Sir, we tried to address that situation. The school board has not heard from me, Reinhardt replied. Or from the Reinhardt Foundation's legal team. No child should suffer permanent injury from a teacher's actions, and no such teacher should remain in a classroom. The renowned pianist's influence suddenly took on new dimensions. It wasn't just his musical connections, but his wealth and power that could reshape Marcus's world. Director Phillips cleared his throat. Several of our current students came from East Side High. I believe Ms. Reynolds is still teaching history there. A knock at the door interrupted them. The blonde girl from earlier entered, her confident demeanor now replaced with hesitance. Excuse me, Director Phillips. The reception? She stopped short, seeing Marcus. Oh. Sorry to interrupt. That's quite all right, Miss Whitman, Director Phillips replied. We'll be along shortly. As she turned to leave, she paused. Marcus? Your playing was incredible. I was wrong earlier, and I'm sorry. Marcus nodded, surprised by the genuine apology. Thank you. After she left, Reinhardt rose. We should join the reception briefly. Marcus's fellow students will need to get accustomed to seeing him as one of their peers. As they prepared to leave, Elijah placed a hand on his son's shoulder. You okay with all this, Marcus? It's happening fast. Marcus thought about the pain he'd endured, the hours of practice, the moments of doubt. He thought about his mother's words, passed down through his father, they don't have to love you. They just have to hear you. Today, he had been heard. Really heard, perhaps for the first time. I'm okay, Dad, he said. I think this is just the beginning. None of them could have predicted just how prophetic those words would prove to be. 6 months later, Marcus stood backstage at Westridge Academy's annual spring concert, adjusting the sleeves of his new suit. Unlike the one his father had purchased with overtime pay, this one had been tailored specifically for him, a gift from the Reinhardt Foundation's Young Artists program. Nervous? His father appeared beside him, looking sharp in his own new suit. Marcus smiled. Not really. Just thinking about everything that's changed. And so much had. Following that fateful masterclass, Victor Reinhardt had been true to his word, and then some. Not only had Marcus received a full scholarship to Westridge, but Reinhardt had also taken a personal interest in his musical development, scheduling private lessons twice monthly despite his demanding international performance schedule. More surprisingly, Reinhardt had worked with specialists at a prestigious medical center to develop a therapy program for Marcus's back. While not completely healed, the pain had diminished significantly, allowing him to sit for moderate periods when necessary, though he still preferred standing for performances. "Marcus, 5 minutes." Mrs. Coleman approached, beaming with pride. Now employed part-time at Westridge as a community outreach coordinator, another of Reinhardt's initiatives, she had helped identify other talented students from underserved areas. "Is he here?" Marcus asked, peering toward the auditorium. "Front row, as promised," she confirmed. The he in question was Elijah's employer, who had initially resisted giving him time off for Marcus's midday performances. When Victor Reinhardt personally called the factory owner, Elijah's schedule had suddenly become much more flexible. 2 months later, Elijah had been promoted to floor supervisor, with hours that allowed him to be more present for his son's increasingly busy musical life. As for Ms. Reynolds, she was no longer teaching. The investigation prompted by Reinhardt's attorneys had uncovered multiple instances of similar behavior toward other students. She had resigned rather than face a public hearing, and the school district had implemented new training programs on classroom management and student safety. "Places, everyone." The stage manager's call interrupted Marcus's reflections. The concert's final piece was unprecedented in Westridge history, a duo performance featuring a student and Victor Reinhardt himself. They would play Schubert's Fantasia in F minor for piano 4 hands, with Marcus sitting for the portions he could manage and standing for others, a choreographed dance of accommodation that Reinhardt had suggested himself. As Marcus took his position at the piano, he caught sight of the audience. Director Phillips sat with the school board members, all looking exceptionally pleased with the attention Westridge had received since discovering Marcus Johnson. Several of his classmates, including the blonde girl, Sophia Whitman, who had become a tentative friend, gave him encouraging smiles. And there was his father in the front row, eyes shining with pride. Reinhardt appeared, immaculate as always in his concert attire. "Ready, Mr. Johnson?" he asked with uncharacteristic warmth. "Ready, sir." As they began to play, Marcus realized that music had transformed not just his own life, but had rippled outward, changing everyone it touched. Reinhardt, once rigid in his adherence to tradition, now spoke openly about accessibility in classical music. Westridge Academy, previously an enclave of privilege, was actively recruiting diverse talents. Most importantly, his own story, of pain transformed into possibility, of prejudice overcome by perseverance, had become an inspiration. 3 other music schools had implemented similar scholarship programs, and a foundation had been established to provide instruments to underserved communities. The music swelled beneath their hands, Reinhardt's virtuosity complementing Marcus's emotional depth. In this moment, they were neither famous pianist nor scholarship student, neither white nor black, neither teacher nor pupil. They were simply musicians, speaking the universal language that had brought them together. As the final chord resonated throughout the hall, Marcus knew with certainty that he had found his place in the world. Not just at the piano or on stage, but in the greater symphony of life, where each person's unique voice contributed to the whole. The audience rose in a standing ovation. Reinhardt, breaking with protocol, gestured for Marcus to take a solo bow first, a public passing of the torch that brought tears to Elijah's eyes. Later, as they greeted well-wishers in the reception hall, Reinhardt drew Marcus aside. "Your mother was right, you know," he said quietly. "Sir. They don't have to love you. They just have to hear you." Reinhardt smiled at Marcus's surprise. "Your father mentioned her wisdom during one of our conversations. She was right, but I've discovered something else these past months." "What's that, sir?" "When they truly hear you," Reinhardt gestured to the room full of people whose lives had been touched by Marcus's talent and story, "love often follows naturally." As Marcus rejoined his father, he carried this new understanding with him. His journey had begun with pain and prejudice but had transformed into something beautiful and unexpected, much like the music he played, with its dissonance resolving into harmony, its challenges ultimately serving the greater composition. And this, he realized, was just the first movement of a lifelong symphony. Dear friend, this story reminds us that talent exists in every community, waiting to be discovered and nurtured. When we look beyond appearances and circumstances to see the gift within each person, we create a world where everyone's unique voice contributes to the beautiful symphony of humanity. Marcus's journey from pain to triumph shows us that obstacles can become opportunities when we refuse to let others define our limitations. His courage reminds us that standing up for yourself, sometimes literally, can change not just your own story, but the stories of countless others who will follow. If this message touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that celebrate the unbreakable human spirit. Together, we can create a world where everyone deserves to be heard.